All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Facts Over Feelings podcast. I'm back here with my co-host Trevor Kaufman, and it's been a few weeks. We took a week off. Trevor and I were both pretty busy. I flew home to Arizona. We had some stuff going on, but regardless, we are back this week with another episode. And needless to say, Trevor, a lot's gone on in the sports world. I mean, in almost every major sport, at least at almost every major sport that we talk about on this podcast. The MLB has started. The March Madness came to a close, actually, Trevor, just last night. And the NFL had some more trades, some more free agent signings the last few weeks with the draft coming up later this month.
Mhm.
And the NBA is continuing in full swing with, the trade deadline that we had, I think, Trevor, about almost 2 weeks ago, actually, maybe 12 days ago. We had quite a few trades in the NBA. So we got a lot to talk about on this podcast. But Trevor, I wanted to start off with kind of, the biggest event of this past month, and that's the NCAA tournament, March Madness. And I wanted to ask you about specifically the national championship game and how that went down. So it ended up being Gonzaga and Baylor in the championship. Kind of predictable, right? Arguably the two best teams going into the tournament.
Mhm.
And Baylor just took care of business against Gonzaga, beat Gonzaga, so an undefeated team could not win at all. I think no one's done it since 1979, I think is the year. So it's been quite
Indiana
some
was left
time.
to do it.
Yeah, yeah. And so Gonzaga wasn't able to do it. And Trevor, I wanted to hear your thoughts on that game. What happened?
I would love to give you my thoughts on this game, Ryan. But first, I want to give a major shout out to my University of Arizona
Mm,
Lady Wildcats for an unbelievable women's NCAA tournament run. We don't talk a lot about women's sports. That's okay. I'm going to give a little bit of a shout out to my Lady Cats.
there you go.
They were a 3 seed, big underdogs. They went to their first ever Elite Eight, first ever Final Four, and first ever national championship game appearance in one tournament. They
Mm,
came 1 point short of beating the heavily favored Stanford Cardinal. It was a magical run, ladies. Great job. Go get it next year. Shout out Ari McDonald. She's a dog and can ball. I hope she has great success in the WNBA. Moving on to the actual itinerary on the podcast, the national championship game for me was kind of a boring game because Baylor
mm,
was dominating this game from start to finish. They got really hot early from three. And what I noticed, I think the biggest thing that stood out to me was the physicality of the game. And this is kind of extending into a bigger issue, but Gonzaga got manhandled. Gonzaga did not look physically fit to play with Baylor. They did not look physically ready to play with Baylor for 40 minutes. And
mm.
it's noticeable. Baylor lifts with the football team. I think that is meaningful because football players do a lot heavier lifting than basketball players in a lot of different areas. Gonzaga does not have a guy that is as big and strong as Mark Vital. What is he, 6'8", 6'9", 260 pounds? He is huge out there.
Yeah.
And the physicality that Baylor plays with, the conditioning they have, their guards on defense are in your face for 40 minutes. It's exhausting. And I don't think Gonzaga was physically prepared to play for this game. And what I was alluding to about the bigger issue is Gonzaga plays in a very weak conference, right? They play a bunch of bad teams all year. They win all those games, and then they win a few big non-conference games early in the season before teams can figure out, who they are and what the rotation is going to be. So Gonzaga, you could argue, is a little bit of fool's gold. This year, they weren't. I think they had a really good team this year. Obviously, they made it to the national title game and were, one win away from a perfect season. But there was a clear physicality level difference between Baylor and Gonzaga, and that's what stood out most to me. And I think that's because Baylor plays in a very tough Big 12 conference where NBA players are, coming in and coming out left and right. And Gonzaga plays in a very weak basketball conference with teams like Pepperdine, Loyola Marymount, and, other garbage teams that can't do anything.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Trevor, for me, I thought when you were going to talk about a bigger issue, I thought you were actually going to talk about the fact that Baylor and Gonzaga, Trevor, had to play just 2 days prior to this national title game. And to me, I get that basketball teams, especially at the collegiate and pro levels, can play games like back to back or every other night. But I feel like when you're at these stakes, and there's the national title on the line, I feel like, maybe they could have another day or two in between the Final Four
Mhm.
and the national title game so they can scout, adequately. They can do their research. They can, rest up a little bit from their Final Four and Elite Eight and all the other games they played in the preceding, 10 days or 2 weeks or whatever. So that, to me, I maybe would want another day or two for these teams to rest up a little bit, but I guess it's not really necessary. I mean, you see in the NBA Finals, they play a game, every other day, I guess, in the NBA Finals, or every, maybe 2 days in between games if they're traveling. But, I guess it's not that big of a deal, but it's something that maybe they could consider doing. For me, about this game specifically, Trevor, you're right. Baylor just manhandled them. And there's really not much else to say. You could see it coming, Trevor. I think when you watch Baylor in this tournament, they didn't really have a close game, right? I think they beat Wisconsin handily. They beat Villanova was close for a while, but they pulled away at the end, right? They played Arkansas, right?
That was probably their closest game.
That was definitely their closest game, I think. But then they played Houston and just absolutely worked them. And then Gonzaga, and they just beat them from start to finish. And I think that this team, they just play amazing team defense. And when you play great team defense in college basketball, it can shut the best teams down. In college basketball, the floor is smaller. The spacing's not as good as the NBA. Players just, they don't create as much space generally. So when you can play right up on guys, especially your guards, Davion Mitchell leading the way. I think he got the award for the best college basketball defender this year, I believe is what he got just last week. And he was sensational, Trevor. He just was fantastic on the defensive end. So I wanted to shout him out. But yeah, team defense was probably the biggest thing in my opinion for Baylor in this game and in the whole tournament. And it was a theme for them this entire tournament. So, congratulations to them, and also congratulations because they won me some money. So I appreciate Baylor for doing that for me.
Sure did.
But it would be a mistake if I didn't talk about the game before this for Gonzaga as well, because I think this played a part in it, Trevor. Because Gonzaga played UCLA in the Final Four, and unlike Baylor, they were not blowing them out. They were in a wire-to-wire game. UCLA gave them everything they had. And honestly, I think UCLA really, they lost in a heartbreaker. Jalen Suggs, one of the best players in this upcoming draft, hit an insane shot. So, I mean, who knows what really would have happened if he didn't make that crazy shot. But Gonzaga had to give it their all in the Final Four. So, that probably translates over a little bit to their next game. They just put it all on the line in the Final Four, whereas Baylor kind of could cruise into the national championship. So I think maybe that had a small part to play in it. But regardless, two great teams, solid game. But I think the real game in this tournament, Trevor, was that Final Four game, UCLA and Gonzaga. What an amazing, amazing game that was.
Yeah, that'll go down as one of the greatest games ever to be played in the tournament. I think Jalen Suggs banking 3 there to win it will probably go down as the second greatest clutch shot, at least to my memory. It's tough to beat Chris Jenkins' shot for Villanova to win the national championship, whereas Suggs's was to get to the national championship. But regardless, an incredible shot, an incredible game. And you do make a fair point. Gonzaga had the late game. Yeah. The game went to overtime. They had to, exert a lot of energy to beat UCLA, whereas Baylor kind of coasted against Houston. So Baylor was probably feeling really good Sunday morning, whereas Gonzaga was probably feeling a little tired. And, now you got to spend the whole day recovering. You got to spend the whole day preparing and calming down after that 3-pointer. And you're right, Ryan, it is a very quick turnaround. It's basically, not even a 48-hour turnaround in between games. So for me, I don't think it's an issue because this is how it is every year. They always do the Final Four Saturday, national championship game Monday. So as a team, you know what to expect. And Baylor got maybe 4 or 5 hours of extra rest between, or not even, probably 3 hours of extra rest between their game finishing and Gonzaga's game starting. So I think Baylor and Gonzaga, the fact that they play right after each other, kind of eliminates that as an excuse for Gonzaga. Yeah. But yes, you're right. That Final Four game was absolutely fantastic. I think for Gonzaga having to put so much into that game and then having to immediately, reset and basically refocus up for a completely different game was tough. And it showed. They didn't look physically ready. They got down a lot early, right? They came out really slow. And I think a lot of that had to do with the Final Four game, as you mentioned, which was a fantastic game. But regardless, that Suggs shot will go down in history, and that game will go down in history as one of the greatest ever be played because that was fantastic.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that game, Trevor, I mean, just that the back half of that second half and that OT were just fantastic. Multiple clutch shots by both teams. It was just, you could tell both teams were just laying it all on the line. So that was one of the best games that I've ever seen in college basketball.
Mhm.
But Trevor, I don't know if you have any final thoughts just on this tournament, on these couple games here. But
Yeah, real quick.
yeah, of
I
course,
just
go ahead.
thought I just thought overall this was one of the best tournaments in recent memory for me.
Mm,
I loved the storylines of this tournament. I loved the 15 seed going to the Sweet 16. I loved all the upsets. I loved the craziness. But at the end of the day, the two best teams were in the title game. Baylor was the best team, and Gonzaga was the second best team. And that's
mm,
how they were seeded. Or Gonzaga was seeded number one, Baylor was seeded two. But regardless, they were seeded as the two best teams. They met in the championship game, and the better team on that day won. But overall, just a great tournament, a great mix of upsets, Cinderella stories, headlines, NBA talent coming to fruition, and a great champion. And I think Baylor well deserved this, very well deserved champion, and
mm.
just a dominant tournament performance.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, well said. So great tournament, and I think Trevor, with that, we can move on to another sport, that has some news, right? We got the
Mhm.
NFL, the upcoming draft later this month, later this April. I believe, Trevor, it's April 29th this year, so a little
3 weeks from
uh,
Thursday. Yeah.
yeah, so a little later in the month than usual, but regardless, it is coming up. And with that, some teams are making moves. And also, not only are teams making moves, but the NFL is changing the rules, as they do most years. They make some minor rule changes. But Trevor, I feel like this year, this isn't really a minor change. And I wanted to talk about the NFL expanding the season by another game, right? So now they added, I believe, a 17th game, an
I did.
18th a
Yeah.
week for these teams to play. And, I just wanted to give my thoughts on it real quick, and then you can go ahead. For this change, I mean, as a fan, I don't know why you'd really care. Like for me, I'll always love more football, right? I mean, sure,
Right.
it'll be fun, more football. Who doesn't love watching football?
Right.
It's going to be a lot of fun. But honestly, when I'm watching the NFL season, I'm not like, man, there really needs to be more games in this season. You know what I mean? I'm not sitting there like, wow, like this is too short of a season. Like we all know how much of a grind the NFL season is. I mean, they take months to prepare in a normal off season. They start in around this time, Trevor. They start around April,
Right after the draft. Yeah.
or May, yeah, right after the draft, all the way until the end of August for the start of the season. So, they prepare for a long time for just a 16 game season. Now they're adding a 17th game. I don't think that's a minor addition. I mean, that's kind of substantial to me, and I'll
Mhm.
enjoy it, Trevor. But I was just surprised that the players would agree to it because it's such a wear and tear on your body to play all these games, especially at certain positions like running back, right? Or, in the trenches on the D or O lines. I was just surprised that the Players Association agreed, but I guess they agreed so they could get a greater share of revenue in the NFL. So I guess that was the trade-off. They can make more money. I guess, they agreed to it. So that's great. I did see some players complaining about it. And I get not everyone probably agreed with the Players Association decision, but it's like, man, it's not like they're just adding a game for nothing. Like you are getting more money. So I feel like, there's a trade-off there, and I feel like they shouldn't complain that much. But I do definitely get the complaints because I'd be a little frustrated, especially if I'm a running back, right? Got to play another game. It just you already can't really make it past 30. Your body is on the clock, and to add another game
Right.
in a season, that's not a small thing. So I don't know if Trevor, you've any thoughts on that, but it's just an interesting change.
For me, I think the ultimate reason why it's become 17 games is that's a lot more money for the NFL. The bottom
Yeah.
line here is a whole nother week of football, commercials, TV ads, all that revenue. Next year we're
Mm-hmm.
probably going to be seeing some full stadiums, ticket revenue, and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, this was always about the money. I can understand why the players are frustrated because 16 games is a really long season as is.
Yeah.
And that's with 4 preseason games. I get it. They're not playing as much in the preseason, but they're still, playing for a quarter, maybe a half, depending on who it is. And I think there's a simple solution to this. I think if you wanted to do 17 or an 18 game season, I think you need to add a second bye week.
Mm.
I think there comes a point where, if you're playing 8 football games in a row and then you get one bye week and you have to play 9 more after, that just seems grueling to me. I like the idea of maybe making it an 18 game season. You have 2 bye weeks, where you maybe get 6 games a bye week, 6 more games a bye week, and then 6 more games. I think it just, divides the season up a little bit better. And I think it's just another opportunity for players to get healthy because oftentimes, I don't want to say seasons are decided by injuries, but injuries have huge impacts
Yeah.
on seasons for a lot of teams. And I don't want to say it ultimately decides who wins every year because it doesn't, but it definitely plays a very big factor. And it can ruin, if the right guy gets injured, it can ruin a team's chances. So I think, again, this is about the money. I can get the complaints. I guess what I'm getting is I bet the younger players or the guys who don't get paid very much probably wanted this because they get a little bit more money.
Mm.
And veterans or guys who already get paid a lot are probably like, hey, like, no, like, why are we doing this? So
Yeah.
I think that's where the contrast is. Ultimately, it passed. You are right, Ryan. More football as a fan for me. I love watching football. I love my Cardinals. I love the
Yeah.
NFL. I look forward to this.
Hmm.
But I can understand the grievances, and to me, it doesn't make too much sense. But it is what it is.
Yeah, and before I move on from this, the thought of a second bye is an interesting concept. Personally, I think that they should just reduce the preseason games. And I believe, Trevor, I'm not
I think they
100% on this,
are
but I believe they are. I believe they're cutting it down to two,
perfect. That's good.
which to me, I think that's a pretty fair compromise because it limits the potential for injury, right? Because
Right.
preseason, as you said, can play a big role in injuries and just the season in general, right? Playing in a game, anyone can get hurt at any given time. And you said you don't want to say injuries can decide who wins. I mean, they definitely do. I mean, look at the NBA. It's a different sport, but that's what happened to the Warriors when they played the Raptors. Injuries
True.
decided who won that year. I mean, it happens. You can even look at this past Super Bowl with the Chiefs and Bucks. You can argue no Eric Fisher, no Mitchell Schwartz for the Chiefs. They had no offensive line. Two all-pro linemen were hurt, and Mahomes is running for his life. I mean, so injuries definitely play a big role and can play a big role in who wins. So you're right. So I mean, this definitely kind of could create an issue with injuries, fatigue and the like. So, you know, it's an interesting decision. I guess at the end of the day, they'll get more money. So maybe everyone will be happy eventually. Um, but Trevor, with that, I think we can move to another topic in the NFL. Shifting topics over to the players and the draft aspect of the NFL. There was a trade, a pretty substantial trade, Trevor. And normally this doesn't happen. You don't normally see trades like this, in early April, late March.
Mhm.
And that was trading of some high draft picks with the Eagles, the Dolphins, and the 49ers. So basically, there were other picks swapped around, but essentially, the Dolphins went from 3 to 6. San Fran went from 12 to 3. And
Mhm.
then the Eagles went from 6 to 12. So the Dolphins now have 6, the Niners have 3, and the Eagles have 12, with other picks obviously thrown in to help out the Dolphins and the Eagles for trading down. Um, but Trevor, I wanted to ask you, like, how does this change this draft? Like, what do you see? Like, are the Niners who are they gonna take? What are the Dolphins like? What does it look like they're gonna do? And who does this help the most?
I love this trade for the Dolphins. They still have pick 12, right? And that seems to me that they're not going to draft a quarterback, which was, kind of like the a little bit of, I guess you could call it a conspiracy theory because Tua didn't look all that great last
Yeah,
year. So
yeah.
clearly, it seems to me the Dolphins are going to go receiver in the first round or something to help out Tua. That would be my guess.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest surprise is San Francisco for me.
Yeah.
Moving up to number 3. If I'm Jimmy Garoppolo, I'm not happy about that. I don't know why they'd be moving up to 3 other than they want a quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
And San Francisco's been very interesting this offseason about, they've been going to certain people's pro days and then publicly saying they're not going to others. I think that's all a game to keep people, confused as to what they're going to do. I
Mm-hmm.
don't buy any of that garbage about them not considering this guy or we're not going to go to this guy's pro day, meaning we're not going to draft him. I think it's all mind games, which I think is genius by John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan. I think they're going to go quarterback at 3. It seems like, though, they're not going to get Lawrence or Zach Wilson. It seems like Zach Wilson is very likely to go number 2. Obviously, Sam Darnold was traded today to the Panthers. So you would think the Jets are going to go quarterback, whether it's Fields, whether it's Mac Jones. I highly doubt. It's probably going to be Fields or Zach Wilson. So I'm curious who the 49ers actually want because if I'm being honest, I don't know who would be their number 1 choice at pick number 3, depending on who's on the board. Finally, I want to swing back to the Dolphins. They basically got they're a little bit confusing, but they trade
Yeah.
a little bit down in the first round to get another third rounder and two future first rounders. I think that's genius business by the Dolphins.
Yeah.
They seem to be a very well ran organization all of a sudden. And look out, Miami's on the rise, and I think this was great business by the Miami Dolphins to make the most out of that number 3 pick.
Yeah, I mean, talking about that real quick, you're totally right. I mean, the Dolphins went from 3 to 6, and they got 2 first-round picks from the Niners. They got a third-round pick for this year, and like they only went down 3 spots. It's just unbelievable to me that they got that
They
much
went
for only.
they went to 12, didn't they?
They did, but then they swapped with the Eagles. They're back at 6 now. So the Eagles went from 6 to 12.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah, so
Okay.
the Dolphins gave their first round pick next year to the Eagles, but they still have the Niners for 2022 and they have the Niners for 2023. And at the end of the day, again, they only go down 3 spots. So to me, Trevor,
Right.
I really like this. And you're right. I mean, the conspiracy about Tua not being the guy is kind of over now. I mean, seemingly going down to 6, it seems like they're going to try to take the best or who they think is the best skill position player, meaning like tight end or receiver. My personal opinion, I think they're going Jamar Chase or Kyle Pitts. I'm not sure who, but I think that they want Tua to have more weapons, and either one of those guys would be perfect for Tua. But so I love it for the Dolphins. For the Eagles, there was also other talks of them drafting a quarterback to compete with Jalen Hurts. I don't think that's going to happen now with them at 12. I think they probably go. I believe Trevor. It's Patrick Surtain, right? I think the right the
You gotta
corner
go
from.
corner.
I think they could go corner. There's a lot of elite corners in this draft. I really like the corners in this one. Asante Samuel Jr. He'll go later in the first round. But point being, there's a bunch of good corners. The Eagles aren't going to take a quarterback.
I
And
agree.
the Niners, it's interesting because I don't think they needed to trade to 3 to get who they wanted, unless it's Justin Fields. And I'm not the biggest Justin Fields fan because I worry about his accuracy, consistency, and just his ability to make like multiple reads. I think that sometimes he got stuck on one guy in college and he kind of got bailed out because Ohio State was so good. But I don't think they need to go to 3 to get Mac Jones. Like I think they could have traded to 6 with the Eagles and been just fine to get Mac Jones at 6. So it kind of confused me to go that high. We'll see what happens. I do agree with you, Trevor. It is a big misdirect by John Lynch to say he's going to Mac Jones's pro days and not going to Fields's. The Niners did this in the past. They were going to Quinnen Williams' stuff. They took him out to dinner. They went to his pro day. And they didn't really talk much about Nick Bosa. And then they took Nick Bosa, obviously. So they've done this before, kind of a misdirect and try to throw some teams off and the public off. I think at the end of the day, it's going to be Fields, and we'll see how it works out. Jimmy G's obviously not happy, you're right. I expect him to get traded sometime in the offseason, actually, once they take a quarterback. I don't think he'll be happy getting paid that much to be a backup, personally. But I don't know if you have any other thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think San Francisco is going to be a very interesting, especially if they draft a quarterback, right? I highly doubt they're going to draft Penei Sewell.
Yeah, I
I'm
don't
sure,
think so.
I don't think he's going to go to them per se.
Yeah.
But you're right. I definitely think San Francisco is going to be a very interesting team to watch this offseason because hypothetically, let's say they do draft Justin Fields, right? Or even Mac Jones, either one. I am really curious to see if Garoppolo instantly becomes the backup or if they do a Ryan Fitzpatrick thing where they play Garoppolo for a little bit, or maybe they trade Garoppolo. It's going to be a very interesting offseason to fall. But I will say Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch have a plan. I think they're too smart to just be going about this on a whim. And I'm very curious to see how this all plays out because I do think there is a lot to happen from draft night to week 1. We could see a very
Yeah.
different San Francisco team.
Yeah, 100%, right? I mean, the offseason really just getting started. I mean, like, I know free agency was here, but we still have the draft and months, the whole summer, right? So we still have a lot of time. I mean, you're right.
Right.
A lot can change. A lot can change with the team. And a lot will change. I mean, so we'll see what happens. Really not a bad move for any team in this,
Right.
Right, in these trades. But I do think, and I think we can both agree, the Dolphins probably made the best long-term moves here, right? With their first-round picks that they got to go down 3 spots. But Trevor, I don't think we have any other thoughts on this.
That's all I have to say
That's
about that.
that's all I have on that too. And with that, we can move on to our other sport, one that's still in full swing right now. We're coming in the final third of the season, Trevor, or roughly the final third.
Oh yeah, pretty much the final third.
Yeah, and that's the NBA. And a lot happened. There was the NBA trade deadline. A lot of trades happened. A lot of cool trades. A lot of trades I really liked.
Mhm.
But I don't really know if we have all that much time to get into those. But we will get into some signings that occurred over the last week to 10 days or so. And Trevor, I wanted to get your thoughts on the Lakers and the Nets signing more borderline stars. Maybe old stars, and that's Andre Drummond going to the Lakers and LaMarcus Aldridge going to the Nets. And I wanted to ask you, do you like either of these moves, and which one will have more of an impact on their team?
I think LaMarcus Aldridge you're already seeing is having a very nice impact for Brooklyn. I've
Mm-hmm.
seen the highlights of a couple of their recent games. I think he's been a nice addition for them. He gives them size, which they didn't really have. You could say DeAndre Jordan gives them size. But DeAndre Jordan's very limited in his skill set, whereas Aldridge is not. But I want to kind of switch gears here a little bit and just talk about this whole buyout rule, because there's become a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
a murmuring in the public eye about, should the NBA change these buyout rules where, Andre Drummond, for example, he's getting paid to leave shithole Cleveland, and now he's getting paid again to play for a championship team in LA.
Yeah.
And it seems, and this isn't necessarily always the case, but it seems like the biggest name buyout guys always go to
Yeah.
the top two contenders, right? Everyone seems to think it's going to be, well, if they get healthy, the Lakers and Brooklyn in the finals. That seems to be the common consensus among the NBA finals. And, these two teams are on a collision course for an unbelievable matchup. So I think that's a little bit, I don't know if the NBA necessarily needs to address the buyout issue. I definitely don't think they'll be able to change any of the rules, because players in the NBA love having power, and they love
Yes.
having the right to choose where they play, and love having the right to, kind of be the man in the room and have all the power and the say when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
these types of decisions. So if the NBA were trying to limit that type of freedom, I don't think the players would respond well to it. But I do think it's a little bit of an issue. I actually, I mean, I don't know. I don't think it's that big of a deal, but I do think it's something worth talking about in the future. In terms of who the most important signing is, I already touched on it. I do think it's going to be LaMarcus Aldridge, because I do think he, fits in better with Brooklyn than Andre Drummond does in LA. For me, LA already has so many big guys: Anthony Davis, Marcus Gasol. They have Montrezl Harrell coming off the bench.
Yeah.
So for me, I think LA needs spacing and shooting more than they need another overrated big man. But I don't know. I think both signings will, help. I do think LeBron and AD will be able to get more out of Drummond than what he was giving Cleveland. Not necessarily stats wise, but in terms of like impact on the game.
Mm.
But I'll stick to it. As I've said already, LaMarcus Aldridge, I think, is by far the best buyout signing.
Yeah, and Trevor, before I talk about like those signings, you bring up a really good point that I wasn't really planning to talk about, but it's a fantastic point. And the buyout market, it's become a sort of problem, especially in recent
Mhm.
years. You're 100% right. With obviously in the last ever since LeBron went to Miami, it's
Mhm.
come and gone a little bit, right? And ebbs and flows, but super teams have become a thing, right? They just have.
Right.
And I last year there was a bit of a lull, right, for a time. But really, Trevor, it's, in my opinion, become an issue. It really has, because you're right. The Cleveland Cavaliers pay a guy over $20 million to leave the team, and he can just up and sign with the best team in the NBA, or the second best, or
Right.
the reigning champions, for any amount of money, and no like restrictions at all. And to me, it is a problem, because what happens is you get all these guys who just, they can go tell their management, like, hey, I don't want to play for you. We're a terrible team. I want out. And they can force them to sit them or buy them out, right? And this is the
Right.
result. So I mean, LaMarcus Aldridge, Trevor, he signed with the Nets for the veterans minimum. I mean, this guy is like a
Right.
multi-time all-star. Like, he used to be elite, and he's still a really good player. I mean, I know he's 35 years old, but he still has some offense left in the tank, and he's a good player. So it's a problem. I 100% agree. I don't know how they're going to address it. They have to, I think, apply restrictions, a sort of money cap. Like, if you're making more than X amount, you can't go on the buyout market, because you're an elite player, and
Interesting point.
we can't have elite players running around to different teams for the vet minimum mid-season. And I don't know how you pass that through. in a new CBA, but I think you have to think about it and you have to consider it because it's definitely become an issue. I don't think it was an issue in past years, Trevor. Back in the 20th century, really, because these guys would play with their current team and generally be satisfied, and even if they weren't, they would just soldier on through, right? You didn't see guys. You don't hear stories of stars just like boycotting the team, sitting out, forced demanding trades. That's more of a modern thing, right? With what comes with power with the players, like you mentioned. So, yeah, I think there needs to be a change, or at least for the good of the NBA, there should be a change. But I don't really expect there to be. But touching on these players, Aldridge and Drummond, I agree with you. I think Aldridge is going to have a better impact. I think that the Lakers will be better for Drummond than he is for the Lakers. I think that if anyone can get Drummond to see what he can do for the team instead of himself, it's LeBron. LeBron can talk some sense into him, but I'm not counting on it. I mean, the guy's played in the NBA for 7 years now, and he still hasn't learned. He hasn't learned how to play team basketball. And I don't expect him to, unless LeBron just starts yelling at him, in the locker room, which is quite possible. But I'm not expecting much. Turnovers, sloppy play, bad shots. That's all part of Drummond's game. And sure, he fills the stat sheet, but what good is that if you can't help the team out and win games and make the right play? So I'm skeptical of that signing. Not a big fan of it unless he plays for the team. And I think Aldridge will play for the team. And he already has, Trevor. I mean, you just look at the 3 games he's played. He's taking almost 3 less shots per game than he was in San Antonio, right? Already filling in a different role, taking less shots, being more of a third or even fourth option in that starting lineup. Fourth option, really, in that starting lineup. So I think he knows how to be a team player more, and he's a more proven winner. So I think that will help the Nets more than Drummond will help the Lakers.
I agree, and it's going to be expected that Drummond, and if Drummond, Aldridge seems like a team player. He signs for the veteran minimum. I don't think Aldridge is going to have a problem not being the first, second, third, or maybe even fourth option. It's Andre Drummond that you seem to be a little bit worried about in terms of will he be willing to become a glorified role player where he might get a few lobs a game and a couple looks, but he's not going to be he's going to be the fourth option. So we'll see. I do think LeBron will be able to talk some sense into him, especially if Drummond wants to win a title, because he is now on the second most likely team. Well, maybe third behind my Suns, but the second.
Okay.
The second or third most likely team to win the championship this year. So we'll see. It's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out.
Yeah, no, I mean, without a doubt, I think it'll be interesting. If Drummond can maybe become a team player, he might have some value. So, who knows? Maybe he can do it. But Trevor, with that, we can move on to our final section here on this podcast. And we're going to do our classic, just talk about some teams that we think are doing well or are struggling and why are they doing so. And I wanted to start off by talking about a team of my own in the Denver Nuggets. Now, we didn't talk about this previously on the podcast, but Aaron Gordon was traded to the Denver Nuggets. And this is an addition, Trevor, that I really like for this team. And the fact that they only gave up RJ Hampton, who's a really nice young player, by the way. He's playing well for the Magic. I like the athleticism, so he can become something. But he wasn't playing on the Nuggets, and he wasn't going to play.
Right.
I think they also gave up a first and maybe one other player. Point being, it wasn't a lot for a very good player in Aaron Gordon, borderline, low-end all-star in the East. And I like him. I like him on this team.
I do too.
He can play team basketball. He won't take bad shots. The guy doesn't put up a bunch of, off the dribble contested shots. He knows his role. And, watching this team, Trevor, he makes the right plays for this team. I mean, I'm watching, they're just having fun. He does a nice behind the back pass to the corner for a 3 from Michael Porter. I mean, this team's just playing well. And he fit in seamlessly. I mean, Trevor, since they traded for him, I mean, just looking at their last 10 games, they're 8-2 in their last 10. They won 5 in a row. So, I mean, they have not missed a beat. Sometimes when you see players traded to a team or newly acquired, they struggle for a few games. The team does, to kind of gel with a new player. I haven't really seen that here. And I remember, Trevor, the last time I talked about the Nuggets on the podcast, I believe it was around the All-Star break, and they were the 8th seed in the West. And I said, they're coming. Here come the Nuggets, and now look at them, Trevor. They're the 4 seed and they're, roaring up strong. They're almost to that 3 seed. They're a half game back of the 3 seed, Los Angeles Clippers. They're right there.
3 games back of my Suns, but you're right.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I expect them to challenge the Suns for that 2 seed. I really do. These Nuggets are not slowing down, and we'll see if the Suns falter. I don't know. I've said it before, I wouldn't be surprised, but they haven't yet, so you never know. But I do think the Nuggets are going to continue to be on a roll. I really like this team in the regular season. I do like them now in the playoffs, actually, now that they've had playoff experience from last year in the bubble, going as far as they did. This team could be really good. They can make some upset noise, upsetting maybe one of the LA teams or Utah or something like that, or even the Phoenix Suns. I mean, it's definitely possible. So I really like this team. They do everything well. And I just really like the addition of Aaron Gordon to this team.
I agree with a lot of what you just said there. I'm actually looking at the Western Conference standings right now, and I'm really liking what I'm seeing based on matchups and, who's playing who. And I look at that 4-5 matchup right now, and I do think this is going to change. But Denver, LA, Lakers in the 4-5 matchup would be a dream come true as a Suns fan, but I'll save that discussion for another day. Strictly talking about Denver here, I love the Aaron Gordon signing. I think it was one of the best signings of the trade or the best trades of the trade deadline.
Yeah,
he's giving them 14 points a game. He's their 4th leading scorer, and he's their 4th leading shot taker. So he has his role on the team. He is going to be the 3rd or 4th guy. Him and Michael Porter are very close in stats, and Aaron Gordon's just another. For Denver, the big issue with Denver was who was going to be the 3rd guy. Right? They have Murray. They have Jokic. Who's going to be the 3rd guy? Michael Porter was ascending into that role, and now let's say Michael Porter or maybe Jamal Murray or Jokic, one of them has an off night. Now you have a 4th option in Aaron Gordon, who can give you 20 points a night easily. I mean, this guy was averaging, I think, more than 4. I think he was averaging closer to 18, 19 in Orlando. So he can give you more than 14 a game if needed. On Denver, it won't be needed because they have a lot of good players. But I love this signing. It fits perfectly, and it fits well with Denver's team identity. They're just very tall and big.
Yeah.
Denver has just a lot of length at every position. I mean, Jamal Murray is not a short guard. I believe he is like 6'5", right? Let me look right now. Sure.
Might be more.
He's 6'3". I apologize. So he's really not that tall. But I look at other guys like Jokic, 6'11". I look at Aaron Gordon, 6'8".
Paul Millsap.
Paul Millsap is 6'8", 6'9". JaMychal Green is 6'8". Will Barton is 6'6". This is a very long – and Michael Porter 6'10". So there you go.
Yeah.
This is a very long Denver team. This is a very big Denver team. And I think they have the size to compete with LA, and they definitely have the skill players to compete with anybody else in the West. They have a superstar in Nikola Jokic. They have a solid number 2 come playoff time, especially in Jamal Murray. And now they have a couple other really, really good role players who will give them added scoring depth come playoff time and solid defense. These are both, at least Aaron Gordon is a very solid defender. So for me, I love this signing. I really like Denver. I've said it before, as a Suns fan, I 100% do not want to play Denver in the playoffs. I'm not afraid of anybody right now, but I'm a little bit afraid of Denver. So let's hope, this is getting a little bit off topic again, but let's hope they can stay around. Best case scenario is the Clippers, Denver, and LA. Those teams are going to finish 3, 4, and 5. So two of those 3 teams are going to play each other in the first round. One of them goes home. That's best case scenario for my Suns right now. But Denver's scary. I don't want to play them, and I do think they could beat LA in a 7-game series. We'll see when LA gets fully healthy because they haven't really been fully healthy most of the season.
Yeah.
But moral of the story is Denver's scary. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and before we move on, Trevor, I wanted to point something out that I saw, and this makes me even more afraid of Denver this year. Nikola Jokic is shooting 42% from 3.
Mm-hmm.
So is Jamal Murray. He's shooting 41% from 3. And Michael Porter Jr. is shooting 45% from 3. To have your top 3 scorers in terms of volume and numbers to be shooting over 40% from 3 at 3 different positions in the starting lineup, that's really scary. That's really scary. And I think this team, I didn't fully realize that this team, they're just a great team. They just work really well together. And to have a center like Nikola Jokic just to control the ball at the top of the key and just absolutely just dictate the flow of the game is so impactful. And we'll get into the MVP discussion on another podcast again, but I think Jokic for MVP is definitely still a discussion.
100%. 100%.
But yeah, this team it's really scary. I just didn't realize that they were all shooting over 41% from three. That's quite scary. But Trevor, I think with that, we can move on to your team that you want to talk about. And you want to talk about a team that's been struggling, right? A team in the East that's really been struggling. And yeah,
Right.
take it away.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the Washington Wizards. I saw an interesting TikTok, funny enough, about the Washington Wizards, and I thought I'd bring it up on the podcast because I think it actually has a couple of very valid points.
Okay.
And you would think in the NBA, right, teams that generally have the talent will get the job done, unless coaching seems to be a huge hurdle. You know, we saw it in Philadelphia with what's the guy's name? Brett Brown, I think, was the old coach, I believe.
Yes, yeah, I think, yeah,
Brett Brown.
yeah.
Right. Philadelphia was tremendously talented, great roster, but they'd always be a first round exit playoff team. Brett Brown seemed to be the reason for that because now Philadelphia is currently the number one seed in the East with Doc Rivers at the helm. We'll see how they do in the playoffs. I think the Washington Wizards are in a bit of a similar predicament, just worse. I don't watch the Wizards too closely, but I am looking at their stats right now, and I'm noticing an issue. I'm noticing the amount of shots per game that Bradley Beal and Russell Westbrook take on a given night. Bradley Beal, who is pretty efficient. He's shooting just under 50% from the floor, and he's only shooting 34% from three, so that's not very good. But Bradley Beal is taking almost 23 shots a night, and Russell Westbrook is averaging 19 shots a night. And Russell Westbrook is not very efficient. 43% shooting from the field, only 31% from three. So for me, I think the issue here is Scott Brooks I think his tactics are all wrong. It's not working. Whatever he seems to be doing, I think there seems to be way too much Beal and Westbrook iso ball, maybe a high screen and roll every once in a while. But I look at the next, guys on the list. Thomas Bryant, who's been hurt, 9 shots a game. Rui Hachimura, 11 shots per game. That's the only other guy averaging more than 10 shots a game. Daniel Gafford averaging 6.5 shots a game. Davis Bertans 8 shots a game. It just seems like this team is way too iso ball centric. And for as good of a backcourt as they have and a young promising player in Rui Hachimura, I would expect them to be a lot better than 17 and 32 on the season. And I think they seriously need to consider, if Scott Brooks is the guy. He underachieved in Oklahoma City. He got them to a finals, but with the team they had, was that good enough? And then he blew a 3-1 lead, in the Western Conference Finals a few years later. So I think, for Washington, they really need to think hard if Scott Brooks is their guy.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a good point. But look, I think Scott Brooks is part of the problem. I really do. Some people want to blame all the players. You can't do that. You brought up a good point to me. I think it was you, but someone at least brought up a good point to me that if you're last in the NBA in defense, the coach has to be to blame, at least for some of it. I mean,
right.
They're 30th in points allowed in the NBA, which is it's terrible. They allow 119 points a game, and it's just unacceptable. I mean, Bradley Beal was complaining about it. He's like, we can't defend like a parked car. But I mean, he's also a part of the problem. Like, look, I get your team around you isn't helping you out on the defensive end, but he's also a bad defender. So I just think that this team, for the talent it has, Trevor, they should be in the playoffs. They should at least be a 10 seed. And we were talking about this as well off the air with just these 2 all-star guards. Like they should be in contention for the playoffs. And right now they're below my Cleveland Cavaliers in the Eastern Conference standings. I mean, that's just absolutely unacceptable. And you bring up a great point about field goals attempted, 42 shots taken, basically 42 shots, taken about between Bradley Beal and Russell Westbrook. That's just unacceptable. It's so many. And I know Russell Westbrook gets a lot of flack, and I know Stephen A. Smith railed against them this past week, but I have to agree with him. And Westbrook and his wife kind of spoke out against Stephen A. and was like, we don't care if he hasn't won a title. But listen, like this guy puts up empty numbers year after year and expects to be a part of like the best of the best conversation year after year. Maybe not so much now, but he was for years. And I don't like it. He's inefficient. You pointed it out, and I point it out every year, Trevor. And I'm going to point it out again. He is inefficient. Doesn't shoot the three well. Doesn't shoot from the field.
He is very inefficient.
And he shoots like 60% from the free throw line.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's really, really bad for a guard to shoot 61% from the free throw line. That's unacceptable. So, I have my issues with Russell Westbrook. I think that everywhere he goes, he puts up empty numbers and they don't win. So, like I said, remember, Trevor, last year, the Rockets were better without him on the floor, right? I mean, I remember talking about that on this podcast. So
and
I think a lot
we're seeing what James Harden was doing with Brooklyn for a while without Kyrie and KD in the lineup consistently.
Yeah.
So I think it goes to show.
Yeah, I mean, he was winning. They weren't slowing down. I mean, yeah, KD's been out for 2 months. They weren't slowing down. And Harden's been out now, and they're still winning with just Kyrie. So, yeah, you're totally right. I mean, I think we both see the issue. It's a combination of coaching, and I think just Westbrook and Beal not working well together. Just overall lack of efficiency in team defense. And, we'll see if they can pull it together. But I really have my doubts, Trevor. I'm not very confident that Washington can pull it together. But I guess – if Bradley Beal and Westbrook really turned on the Jets, they can maybe sneak into the playoffs. But I am not confident in that right now.
Yeah, I agree with you. The thing is, the bottom half of the East is really bad. So all it takes is a little bit of defense and, maybe a little bit of better team basketball. And it's very possible the Wizards, go on a little bit of a streak here to end the season and maybe sneak their way into the, to the 8th spot just to get swept by Brooklyn.
Sure.
But it could be where they could make something of this season. And the Russell Westbrook move was weird in the offseason. I know you and I talked about that one a little bit, Ryan, on the podcast. Yep. And it doesn't seem to be working out, at least through 49 games of the first season. So there's still, 23 games left on the schedule for them. Will they be able to salvage much? Probably not, but we'll see. With that being said, Ryan, I did want to switch gears a little bit, stick to the NBA, and now that the Phoenix Suns are winning, 35-14, what would one of our podcasts be like if I didn't talk about some outrageous thing about the Phoenix Suns, right?
Oh boy.
And tonight, I don't want to brag about how we're second in the NBA in field goal percentage, team field goal percentage, or how we're 5th in points per game allowed, or how we're the only top 10 team in the NBA in offensive and defensive efficiency. And number 1 in team assists per game in the NBA. No. I don't want to talk about any of those stats, Ryan. And I gave you 4 stats. There's hundreds more I could say. I want to talk about something a little bit interesting. And I actually saw this, I read this on a comment, and I actually thought this really resonated.
Okay.
And this goes all the way back to 2011.
Okay.
And it's the infamous one time I can think of in professional sports history where an organization blocked a trade. The Chris Paul to the Lakers trade that never happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking to myself,
oh no, I know where this is going.
I was thinking to myself, 10 years later, Kobe's obviously been gone now for a little over a year. Who is the closest thing we've seen to Kobe?
Don't say it.
And a lot of people think Devin Booker is going to be the reincarnation of Kobe.
Oh my goodness.
So what I was thinking to myself is, obviously DeAndre Ayton he probably wasn't as good as Dwight Howard was at that time.
Yeah.
But this is the 2011 Lakers reincarnated as the 2021 Phoenix Suns. Chris Paul has said it multiple times very publicly. I came to Phoenix with Devin Booker. Why else would you come to Phoenix? Why else would you go to the Lakers when Kobe was, still when he was still playing at a high level? You go to the Lakers to play with Kobe. And I really do believe that Chris Paul had a thought in his head. We could be like the 2011 Lakers that never was. And I really do believe that this is the reincarnation of that team that never happened. And now the NBA, unfortunately, let it happen this time around. And they're seeing what's happening. The Phoenix Suns are a problem. And I really hope Chris Paul stays another couple of years, because I think for most of the Suns players, their best basketball is ahead, not behind. Maybe for Chris Paul, that's the opposite. But I really do think this little conspiracy thought in my head has some weight to it. And Ryan, I want your thoughts on it. I know you're laughing. I know it's funny. It's a little bit out there. But I really do want you to think about this. And I want you – obviously, I'm not trying to say Devin Booker is Kobe, right? I'm not going to argue that.
Yeah.
What I am going to argue is Chris Paul sees a little bit of Kobe in Devin Booker. And that could be a big reason why he came here. It is a big reason why he came here. And I want your thoughts on this because I've been festering about this all day and I had to talk about it with somebody.
Look, I you mentioned this to me before, and when you just brought up Devin Booker and Kobe Bryant in the same sentence, I mean, I had to laugh a little bit. Okay, I had to laugh a little bit because look, Devin Booker can't carry a team the way Kobe Bryant did.
With Shaq and other Hall of Famers. You're right. Kobe did carry those teams.
Kobe
And Pau Gasol and Derek Fisher and all those other Ron Artest.
Kobe carried his team further than Devin Booker has without Shaquille O'Neal on his team, okay? Point is, Trevor, I don't think Chris Paul was thinking about Kobe Bryant when he went to Devin Booker. Do I think that he thinks Devin Booker is the second coming of Jesus Christ himself? Maybe. Maybe he thinks he's an absolute god of a basketball player.
He very well could be, Ryan.
Devin Booker is one of the best shooting guards in the NBA. Okay, I'll say that. You know, he has immense talent, obviously, but he needed someone to help him win because Devin Booker clearly can't win by himself. He's not good enough. Okay,
he needed to learn how to win.
He really did. He needed to learn how to win, and Chris Paul's doing that for him. So, I mean, I've talked about it at length. I think Chris Paul's helping this team learn how to win, you know. And I don't think there's some crazy conspiracy that he's thinking about his 2011 days when he got shunned. He was not allowed to go to the Lakers with Kobe. But talking about that for a second. What a crazy turn of events, right, Trevor? From David Stern not allowing a trade to go through to seeing the buyouts, seeing some of the trades that we see now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's just unbelievable. I don't know. It's just unbelievable to me. Like, I feel like if David Stern was still here to, you know, be in charge of this, it would be like one of his worst nightmares, seeing all these super teams just gathering. Look, Chris Paul, he got his wish. He'll win maybe one playoff series and lose like he always does. The Suns will be forever destined to be a playoff team that couldn't quite do it. But we'll see what happens, Trevor. Maybe he'll break the Chris Paul curse and finally make the NBA Finals.
Oh, you know, I like to have a little bit of fun on these podcasts. And I thought this would be something fun to bring up because there was enough of a correlation to maybe, you know, make you think for half a second. Ryan doesn't see the beauty in this little conspiracy thought. I do. Ryan's biased. It's okay. He's a Suns hater. And that's fine. Like, it's totally okay. I would argue the Suns are one of the more popular teams in the NBA. I know people who live in Minnesota who are fans of this team. I know people who live in Charlotte, North Carolina who are fans of this team. So for me, you know, we're taking, as one of the Suns bandwagon, you know, founding chairs, we are taking applications for fans year round, Ryan. And when we win the West and we push Brooklyn to a 6 or 7 game series in the finals this summer, I will be looking forward to your application.
Look, all I'm saying, we can wrap this podcast up right after I say this, Trevor. But look, here's the thing: is I'm just glad when my team was competing in the NBA Finals year after year, I was actually excited for that. I couldn't imagine now, Trevor, being excited just to make the playoffs and lose. I couldn't imagine being excited for that. So, you know, I feel the pain of Suns fans.
Put LeBron on this team, we'll never lose. We'll go 82-0.
I will say if LeBron James was on these Phoenix Suns, they would win the NBA championship. Without a doubt in my mind. I do believe that. I think a lot of people would agree with that. But unfortunately, LeBron James did not go to the Phoenix Suns. He never will. So, you know, we can live in that fact and love it. So I'm personally happy about that. Cleveland Cavaliers still won the title more recently than the Phoenix Suns. So we can all be happy here. But Trevor, with that, you know, unless you have any final shout outs, you know, we can wrap this.
No, I gave my big shout out at the beginning of the podcast. Your grumpiness is putting me in a bad mood, Ryan. But that's okay. I'll let you conclude this podcast while I go cry after the insulting nature you talked about my sons in, but that's okay.
All right, sounds good. We'll wrap this podcast up. I will shout out my boy Darius Garland, career high 37 points just last night over the San Antonio Spurs. You know, a nice win. But yeah, I think we'll just wrap this podcast up. Thanks for watching, everyone, and be sure to go watch the Phoenix Suns lose this week. See you back next week.